Hello and welcome back to another retro gaming video. In the background you can see my retro gaming station, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Those are two thin clients from Hewlett-Packard, one for Windows XP gaming that's a bit more powerful and one for DOS gaming that's a bit more compatible. And I wanted to show off these cheaper alternatives to something like the ITX Llama or Pixel x86 and show you what you can do with them, how compatibility is, how you can make sound to run, and what the overall experience is. So without further ado, let's get into some nice retro gaming. So what are we talking about specifically today? It's the HP T610 and the HP T5300. Now, I'm not much of a hardware guy, so I'm not going too much into the specifics, but I'm going to throw the specs here at the screen and a link to a homepage where you can find a lot more information about these machines. Generally, the T610 is a lot more powerful and modern, and the T5300 is more suited to DOS gaming. I did get the T610 first, but whereas early Windows games run fine, DOS games often struggle with the fast CPU and the amount of built-in memory. An important detail for both machines is that they come with a VIA chipset onboard audio, so you can use Soundblaster Emulation for DOS games. I will be going into that in more detail later. The T610 is a bit more generous with its I/O, but the T5300 has just enough USB slots to make everything run without having to use a hub. What I also like about the T610 is how easy you can disassembly it without having to use any screws whatsoever. On the inside you can see the SSD I put in there. It's pretty big but also very slow. I'm not quite sure why that is the case, probably the controller of the machine or something, but you have to be pretty patient waiting for those loading times. The T5300 doesn't come with the option to add an SSD, so it only has a flash memory inside with a maximum capacity of 2 GB. It's enough to install some DOS games that need some more I/O throughput, like the slow USB drive, but it's pretty limiting if you want to install everything, so I basically have all the games portable on the USB stick and run them from there. So we are starting with the Windows experience here, waiting for XP to load, which, as I said, can take a while. If you're expecting to run Crysis on this machine, then I'm sorry I have to disappoint you, it's not nearly powerful enough for that. Generally 2D games run just fine on this machine, but everything 3D kind of struggles. So now I'm going to show you some 3D examples that don't run properly, so you get an idea of where the limits of these machines are.
Mars City is a smoke-free facility. Please smoke only in designated areas. Thank you for your cooperation.
Now, Doom 3 is one of the most demanding games of that era, and I was rather surprised that it runs this well. I would not say it's playable though, it's really choppy at times and the frame rate is very uneven. The footage you can see here is on the lowest resolution and lowest detail level possible, so yeah, this is unfortunately a no, but it's really annoying because it's close to being playable in my mind, but well, it's just close but not really there.
All they want is something to make them more money. Some product. Don't worry.
The next game that's close but not really there is Simpsons Hit and Run. I had higher expectations for this one, but it has the same stuttering as Doom 3, so probably it's some memory issue or loading issue, I'm not quite sure. I did actually play this game for a while with these frame rates, and well, you can manage, but it's not really enjoyable, as you can see. If you're in for some racing fun, Revolt on lower settings runs pretty well and is completely playable. This also holds true for some of the earlier Need for Speed games, but don't get your hopes up into running Underground on this machine. Yeah, it's really more of a Windows 95 than a Windows XP machine. Now you might ask yourself, why didn't I install Windows 95 or 98 on here? The reason is that these operating systems really had issues with the hard disk controller. It took almost 9 hours to install the operating system, and after that it was completely unstable. I almost gave up on the machine, but then tried Windows XP and well, that runs fine enough. Now if you read between the lines, you can probably hear a bit of disappointment with the machine from me. And yeah, that's the reason why I got the other one, because I really didn't want to play Windows games in the first place. I'm more of a DOS gaming guy, so these 3D games we are looking at right now are more of an afterthought to me. As you can see, SimCity 3000 runs absolutely fine, and I spent way too much time with quote-unquote testing the game that I ought to. I just think this entry in the series is totally underrated. On the top end for 2D games we have Diablo 2. This game, in my opinion, is playable, but it is not completely fluid, especially if there are many enemies at the screen at once or when entering a new area. Though this might be due to the fact that it is 3D accelerated and thus limited by the GPU power. As you can see from the footage, I don't have a capture card, but I did try to use some good old fraps on Windows XP to capture some gameplay. As you can see, it works here for Time Shock Pinball, but it has heavy impact on the performance, so without the capturing, this game runs completely smooth with 60 frames per second, but having fraps running in the background capturing this footage really takes a toll on the machine. Now you can also run DOSBox on Windows XP obviously, but this kind of goes against what I wanted to achieve with these machines in the first place. So let me explain why I even bought them. Now normally I play games on my gaming PC, and that's no exception for retro games. But I wanted to have a separate dedicated retro gaming setup for this room without any distractions. The second thing that was really important to me was being able to play on a CRT monitor to get that authentic experience. As I said in the beginning of the video, I'm not so much of a hardware guy, so I was hesitant to get some period correct hardware which belongs in a museum and not in my incapable hands. Also, I don't really have that much space in the living room, so I wanted to get a small form factor and not a high tower or anything like that. And last but not least, I wanted to run DOS natively and not with emulation. Not because the games run much differently, but just for nostalgic reasons to have the authentic experience here. With just $20 and $35 respectively, there also wasn't much risk to do anything wrong here. Now let's talk about performance on the 5300. As you can already see from Need for Speed here, 3D DOS gaming works pretty well on this machine. It runs even the most demanding games in SVGA most of the time. I was pretty surprised that I had to slow down the PC to get high octane running in SVGA on a playable frame rate. That game was infamous for its hardware requirements, and I think it's also an underrated game. I don't know why so many people complain about it. I really like how the cars feel in the game and a unique handling of them, but maybe it's because it's a bit dull looking and the overall presentation is not that exciting. The only game the machine has a bit of trouble getting to run is Screamer, but that's only for the SVGA version. In VGA it runs perfectly fine, but if you want to run it at the higher resolution, it gets a bit slow, though still playable, I would say.
Hey, you're in the lead! Go, go, go!
Oh, and I almost forgot about Duke Nukem 3D, which is also a bit choppy when you play it in high resolution, but it runs pretty well when you run it in VGA. I'm going to show you a few more 3D examples here before we go on and continue to the topic of sound emulation. Now, being able to play sound and music in DOS games is obviously a big deal. But back in the day, you needed separate sound cards like the Soundblaster or Adlib, and these have become exceedingly expensive over the last years. And well, those thin clients don't have the space or ISO slots to put them in anyway, so we need another solution. Now, I have installed not one, not two, but 3 different sound emulators. From my experience, you will get the best compatibility with the VRSB driver, but that takes up a lot of conventional memory, so especially older games that can't use the extended memory as well require the different drivers here. SBMU and VSBHDA are somewhat related. I really can't tell you the exact difference between these drivers, but well, some games work better with the first and others with the second. As you can see, this adds another configuration layer you have to do, which is a bit painful. If you have a game that requires a specific sound emulator, specific memory configuration, and maybe even slowdown of the CPU, then it might take a while to get it running properly. That being said, with the 3 different drivers I was able to get about 80% of all the games running that I wanted to try, which I think is a pretty good share. I mean, even on an actual 486 you sometimes had issues with some specific games that just didn't want to run right. Unfortunately, 2 of my favorite games, Jazz Jackrabbit and Tyrion, are not compatible with the Soundblaster emulation. This is not due to the machine but to the Soundblaster emulators themselves, and it's a known issue because these games did some crazy stuff with their sound drivers, and I still hope that maybe someday we get an update that makes them work correctly. Last but not least, I also got the Soundblaster to work under Windows, but unfortunately the MIDI emulation won't work there, so you have the fallback option to have MIDI played over PC speaker, which sounds horrible. I will show you a little example later, but you won't get the full MIDI experience here, but at least you get the sound effects and can play games that way. Now let me add a few random tidbits and information for the end of the video. For example, you might ask yourself, can it play CD-ROM games? Yes, it can, even without a dedicated CD-ROM drive. You can use SHSUCD to mount CD-ROM images and emulate a virtual drive. And the best thing is that the driver for this virtual drive takes up less memory than MSCDEX, the default CD driver for MS-DOS games. The only downside is that it does not support CD audio tracks. I also mentioned earlier that sometimes you need to slow down the CPU to get the games run at the correct speed. I'm using another tool called Slowdown to do that, which works fine with most games, though the slowdown sometimes is not very even, and especially in games that have scrolling, it can sometimes lead to some choppy scrolling, as you can see here in Theme Park. Still, it's more playable than on full speed, I would say. And last but not least, I had some fun getting Space Quest 1, the VGA version, and Space Quest 4 to run properly. Those 2 games are notoriously picky with CPU speeds and won't run correctly unless you use some fan patches that I found on the internet. By found I mean on some ancient website that is not online anymore, so I re-uploaded them to archive.org if you're interested. And that's it. I hope you had fun watching this video about the thin clients as much as I had fun tinkering around with them. For me, it's always about getting these games to run, sometimes even more than playing them. So if you get some inspiration here, maybe you want to get a hold of these yourself on eBay or wherever, and I hope you enjoy them just as much as I did. And with that, see ya!